Greetings, friends. You're on the Ruslan Belov channel, and today we'll discuss the situation in Ukraine as of March 24th, 2025. A tremendous number of events have occurred today, so let's get started. Before we begin, I'd like to sincerely ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription helps support its growth. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. Now let's move to the front lines and see how the situation is developing there. We'll start with the Kursk direction, or perhaps it's already the Sumy or Belgorod direction. It's hard to define the Kursk direction precisely because on one section of the front, the Russian army is advancing, while on another, Ukrainian forces are attacking. We'll begin with the Sudzha salient. Today, more and more evidence and facts suggest that by the end of March 24, the Sudzha border crossing had come under the full control of the Russian armed forces. At least, this has already been reported by a Telegram channel closely linked to the Seva troop grouping. Since early morning, there have been adjustments along the front line, and by the end of the day, reports emerged of Russian units fully securing the area. It's possible that a video will soon be released showing the Russian flag raised somewhere along the border crossing. There are also reports that Russian units have nearly completely taken the settlement of Basovka. Footage from reconnaissance drones shows strikes on the Russian army's forward positions. Ukrainians complain that holding the defense in Basovka is now impossible, and Ukrainian armed forces units are gradually retreating to the next settlement, Lochnia. So we can see that the front is steadily moving towards Sumy Oblast, and combat operations may soon begin near Yunikivka. At the same time, the Russian side has opened another front, advancing from Gordeevka toward the settlements of Vladimirovka and Vodolaki. Many experts, primarily pro-Russian, report that Russian units have significantly expanded their zone of control and are advancing toward these two villages. This is how the map has been adjusted over the past day. There are also reports that movement may soon begin along the Zhuravka line, further toward Belgorod. At the very least, over the past day, this section of the front has been regularly hit with FAB bombs and Sonsepiok thermobaric systems, indicating artillery preparation for a possible offensive. In other words, on this part of the front, the initiative lies entirely with the Russian Federation. As for the Belgorod direction, the situation here is not as effective or successful for Russian units as it is near Sudzha. Today, for the first time since the start of the Ukrainian offensive, the map within Russian territory has been adjusted. The first video evidence and reconnaissance footage have emerged, suggesting that by the end of March 24, the Ukrainian armed forces had taken control of at least 80% of the village of Demidovka. It's possible that by the end of the day, the village will be fully under Ukrainian control. The footage shows a Russian drone striking Ukrainian forward positions in the central part of the settlement. Ukrainian units were stationed in this building, which was hit by an FPV drone. Afterward, Ukrainian soldiers ran out and took up positions in nearby structures. Another video from the westernmost part of the village shows a similar situation, 3 Ukrainian soldiers moving westward. Based on this footage, as well as mapping services and pro-Russian sources, this part of Demidovka has been completely marked as under Ukrainian control. Further important news, given the Ukrainian army's advance, it appears that the only asphalt supply route between Popovka and Demidovka has been cut off by Ukrainian forces, leaving Popovka without supplies. Of course, resupply is still possible via northern dirt roads and fields. However, reports indicate that the Ukrainian army has begun crossing the small Udava River to approach Popovka from the west. Additionally, Ukrainian units are attempting to bypass Demidovka between Popovka and the village itself from the west and northwest to circumvent a forested area. According to open-source information, the main defensive stronghold of the Russian armed forces is located within this forest, which allows the Russian army to hold back Ukrainian advances and prevents Ukrainian units from pushing further north. Fighting continues here, but there is a very high likelihood that if the Russian army fails to stabilize the situation, Ukrainian forces may soon seize control of the small pocket between Popovka and Demidovka. This could happen within the next few days. There are also reports today that the Ukrainian armed forces used a HIMARS strike to destroy a bridge near the Hryaznaya River, or a small Hryaznoye reservoir. In the area of the village of Grafovka, the bridge was partially destroyed. Infantry can still cross, but vehicles can no longer pass. If we look at Grafovka's geographical position, we can conclude that the village is now cut off from resupply from the mainland. This could also give Ukraine an opportunity to soon take control of at least the northern part of the settlement and secure the territory within these yellow lines. As we can see, Zelensky is trying to expand his exchange fund. He hasn't abandoned the idea of trading captured Russian territories for Ukrainian land. Possibly for this very purpose, he is now attempting to push another offensive on the Belgorod sector of the front. Meanwhile, over the past day, Russian forces launched several Iskander missile strikes on the city of Sumy. Sources report that the strike targeted a command center or possibly a temporary deployment point. At the same time, Ukraine has released reconnaissance footage showing a small Russian helicopter base near the village of Ivnya, 2 Mi-8s and 2 Kar-52s, which was allegedly struck by Ukrainian American HIMARS. At least, that's what Ukrainian sources claim. The Russian side has not yet commented on this strike. The information could be fake. Next, we move to the Svatove-Kupiansk sector, where heavy fighting continues for the northern encirclement of the settlement. Today, according to some pro-Russian sources, the Russian armed forces have made significant advances and are now engaged in battles for the small village of Maloshapkovka. Reliable pro-Russian sources report this, along with footage of Ukrainian losses during the defense of this village. Overall, more and more evidence suggests that Russian forces are successfully advancing on the northern flank of Kupiansk, pushing toward its western and northwestern outskirts. Now to the central Kupiansk direction, which has also seen significant developments. The most contradictory reports come from the village of Nadia. Recall that yesterday, Ukrainian sources published footage and heavily promoted an attack by the Ukrainian 3rd Brigade, currently undergoing reorganization, soon to be reformed into the 3rd Army Corps. According to Ukrainian reports, their forces fully secured Nadia, and maps were updated in favor of Ukraine. However, today, March 24th, most pro-Russian experts claim that Nadia has been retaken by Russian forces. We're not rushing to update the maps yet, as over the past day, extensive drone and artillery strike footage has emerged, showing Russian counterattacks on Ukrainian positions in the village. Heavy fighting is ongoing, but declaring full Russian control would be premature. Additional reports indicate that Nadia wasn't the only Ukrainian attack vector. Neutral cartographers note that Ukrainian forces have expanded their control near the village of Zeleny High and made small breaches in Russian defenses between Stepy and Kopanki. We're holding off on map adjustments until further confirmation. Finally, we turn to the Toretsk sector, where the most critical developments are unfolding. Today, Russian units nearly completed clearing the northwestern part of the settlement, with strike footage confirming advances. But the most significant news comes from the pocket between Vozdvijenka and Toretsk. As we've discussed before, this is likely where the decisive battle will occur. A Russian push toward Konstantinovka from the south and southwest. Today, the Russian army appears to have launched this operation. Multiple sources report that Russian forces broke through Ukrainian defenses near Novgorodske, entering 2 settlements, Pantelemonivka and Alexandropol. It's difficult to assess how far and decisively Russian units have advanced, but there is verified footage confirming their presence in the settlement of Alexandropol. Based on this evidence, we've made minor adjustments to the map. Just yesterday, most of these areas were considered contested territory. Today, there's no doubt that the Russian army has launched a determined assault and significantly expanded its zone of control. For the past 24 hours, Russian forces have been actively operating drones along the southern and southwestern outskirts, likely creating the impression that the main strike would come from those directions. However, to the surprise of Ukrainian units, the primary attack was launched from the east. If this defensive line is breached, the Russian army will likely accelerate its offensive along the H-20 highway, pushing toward the Kliban-Bitska reservoir. This would allow Russian forces to fully cut off the salient between the settlements of Vozdvijenka, Toretsk, and, of course, Chasiv Yar. This is where we can expect the Russian army's major offensive in late spring or early summer 2025. I should also remind you that just a few days ago, Valery Gerasimov visited the operational zone of the Center troop grouping, where he received reports and possibly issued directives. It appears that during this visit, Gerasimov and field officers finalized plans for the Konstantinovka offensive operation. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces are attempting counterattacks. Today, footage emerged confirming their partial control over a small pocket between Vodyane Drua and Zelene Pole. The footage is archival, there's still snow, but it suggests this area remains under Ukrainian control, allowing their units to launch counterstrikes against Russian positions in the village. Let's examine how the map has changed in recent days. Yesterday, the area between Vodyane Druhe, Baranivka, and Zelene Pole was still contested. Some cartographers had marked it as Ukrainian-controlled weeks ago. Today, verified footage confirms Ukrainian presence in this sector. Despite Ukrainian counterattacks and possible control over this pocket, Russian forces continue advancing toward Tarasivka to cut off Ukrainian supply lines and force a retreat. From this direction, the Russian army also plans to move toward the Kleban-Bitsky Reservoir along the H-32 road. Next, we turn to the Pokrovsk sector, where heavy fighting is unfolding near the settlements of Spivakivka and Solonoy. Many pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian analysts have noted a Ukrainian counterattack toward Solonoy. Ukrainian units managed to infiltrate the settlement and secure positions on its western outskirts. This has severely complicated Russian supply lines to Kotlin and Udakne. At the same time, reports confirm Russian advances in central Uspenivka. It appears Ukraine has not abandoned its plan to cut off the salient between Kotlin, Dakne, Volove, and Solonoy. We can expect increased strikes in this area, possibly including Ukrainian diversionary maneuvers to slow the Russian advance toward Konstantinovka. On the southern Donetsk front, the map remains unchanged over the past 24 hours. The Russian army appears to be in a lull, possibly regrouping. Recall that units here have been attacking non-stop since late 2023. The pause may continue briefly before combat resumes. On the Zaporizhia axis, the offensive has stalled. Footage shows Russian tanks engaging Ukrainian strongpoints on the approach to Kupiansk. Progress hasn't stopped, but has slowed significantly, not by choice, but because Russian forces have reached the first line of Ukraine's heavily fortified defenses. Any further advance will be slow. Rapid movement here would incur catastrophic losses. On the Kherson front, after winter's end, Russia has resumed artillery and airstrikes on Ukrainian positions east of the Dnipro River. This could signal preparations for a potential crossing or simply an effort to inflict irreparable damage on Ukrainian units in the area. That's all for now, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel, leave your likes, and take care.